Excuse me this time. Okay, so it's 8:30 already. We're going to get started because Baruch Hashem, we have another fantastic class, another fantastic sikha to go through. It's a fantastic time in the year as well. The shadow with the king in the field. I say a special mazel tov again to the baby Michal. We just heard her name. And
thank you.
From all the kinder whole day in the klech. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in this time of the year in the calendar. We're going to talk about what's going on in the Parshah. And from there, we'll move on to what is one particular area in this week's Sedra that can give us a practical life lesson to help us in today in the here and now. So we have, before we start, on the screen for those of us who are logged on a computer, have a little ad encouraging people who are checking mezuzahs, and even if you weren't planning on checking mezuzahs, this is an easy way. It's actually a very cheap, if it's a free way, to at least do something to check your mezuzahs in the month of Elul in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. But I would strongly encourage people to check the mezuzahs. So in addition to making sure that the scroll is correctly written. There's an interesting shir we heard from Rabbi Yehuda Pink last week on Tuesday about how getting it from a reliable source is often the only way to ensure that many of the halachas which make a mezuzah kosher, without which the mezuzah is absolutely 100% unkosher, the only way we can ensure many of those halachas is to know that the sofer, the writer who wrote the mezuzah, was a Yirei Shamayim and is traceable to know where it came from. One of the examples he used was if it was printed by a very high-tech machine. Often there's no way to know, but even worse than that, if it's written by someone who's not Jewish and not Mechuyev b'mezuzah, and therefore that's possible. And then there are times where a person writes a mezuzah and changes something earlier on in the mezuzah at a later stage. So if a person notices a mistake or didn't fill out a letter correctly and add something on, there's no real way to know that that's a problem, because once it's written again, there's no way to know it was or it wasn't written in the right order. And that's why making sure we get our mezuzahs from a reliable source is extremely important. But assuming the mezuzah we have is kosher, and assuming the weather hasn't got to it, whether it's the wet weather or the hot weather, whether it's the heat or the cold or the wet, there's also the major issue of positioning of mezuzah. And in that, there's two main areas. One is to make sure that every doorway, that's even if it doesn't have a door, every doorway that needs one has one. And the other thing is to make sure that it's on the correct position on the doorpost. So it's on the right side from the right way around. Because sometimes you look at a doorpost and you say, this is the right side. Then you go around to the other side of the doorpost. You say, hold on a second, it's the other side. And sometimes it's tricky. The other thing is also how tall, how deep, and which angle to put a mezuzah is very important. The most classic example is if you put the mezuzah up without realizing that the scroll inside, the clef inside the mezuzah case was by mistake and put it in the wrong way around. And then we think we're putting mezuzah up the right way around, where in reality it's upside down and is not kosher. It's as if it's not been affixed to the door. So these are little things that we can do. And that's why we're encouraging using Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp calls, or whatever it is, to video check all the positions of your mezuzah around your house. You book yourself a slot, and in no time you have clarity of where you're up to. It's not so hard to change. And then there's a discussion on when you do it, don't make a bracha. So if anyone would like to do one of those Zoom mezuzah checks around the house, it's COVID safe, and it's a great thing to do. We're more than happy to try and assist and make that work. Moving right along, we're going on to this week's shir, and that is the shir for Parshas Sovo, starting off with what's going on in this week's Jewish calendar. Today is the anniversary of the wedding of the Rebbe Rashab. So all those years ago, and amazingly, the Rebbe Rashab's father, the Rebbe Rash, wasn't able, for spiritual reasons, to come to the chasna, and for a few years, him and his wife lived by his in-laws. But then when they moved to Lubavitch, the story goes that his Rebbitzin felt inferior to all her in-laws because they were cousins actually, but they were all taller than her. She felt bad that she wasn't tall. And basically this made it into a story, one of the Beis Harav stories, where famously her father-in-law, the Rebbe Marash, who was then the Rebbe, told her the great line, don't worry about not being tall, because short trees grow very good fruit. And of course, we know her child was the Frierdiker Rebbe, the father of Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. So, of course, when the Rebbe says anything, it's exact. But in this particular case, the Rebbe literally uplifted his daughter-in-law, the wife of the Rebbe Rashab, to make her feel good, even when she had her own little challenge. It's important to be able to deal with them and not let them fester, but also to look at it in a positive light. In addition to that, of course, last week we spoke a lot about Melech Basada, the king being in the field, which basically means the only reason why the king comes into the field is because the king likes spending time with the people he loves, and the people Hashem loves is us. Amazing. It's Chodesh Elul. Hashem has come out to make sure that we know we're important. Hashem is coming out to make sure we know that he believes we can do it. Literally, we can. Not everyone else, not just everyone else, but each one of us in particular as well. And that's the time of the year we're in. It's fantastic. It's unbelievable. So it's Tifin Elul, we're already up to Yud Aleph, going into Yud Beis Elul. Good things are happening. And we're going to focus on this week's Sefer Parshas Sovo. Parshas Sovo, without getting carried away, is always at least 2 weeks, 2 Shabbosim before Rosh Hashanah. But when we read Parshas Sovo, we're usually very close to Rosh Hashanah and everything that brings. And of course, the lessons of Parshas Sovo always carry us an extra boost to be able to make sure that this week rocks, is unbelievable. It literally lifts us up, because it has to be that way as we get closer and closer to a time where the Eibishter shows us how much he believes in us, how much the Eibishter wants us, and he brings us back to his palace as the story goes. So we're going to do a summary of Parshas Sovo. It starts off with a mitzvah of Bikurim. The mitzvah of Bikurim is a mitzvah that a farmer would fulfill when he had his first produce. He would give away a portion of that to Hashem, and that would be brought with great fanfare and great excitement, which we'll talk about soon. We also learn about, in this week's parasha, about the Meiser that was given to the Levi. 1/10 of the produce after the donations to the Kohen, or 1/10 of what was left, was given to the Levi. And then there's also the part that's given to the poor. We then go on to, in this week's parasha, to discuss a topic that was already mentioned in Parshas Re'eh. And that is a very specific occurrence that took place when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael for the very first time. When the Yiddish people came into Eretz Yisrael for the very first time, on Har Eval and Har Gerizim, the 2 mountains, they were going to have to make a grand, almost performance to ingrain into all of the Yidden the importance of following Torah and mitzvahs. And that was the big announcements that took place, all the blessings, the brachas for all those who follow in Hashem's ways, and the opposite of brachas for those who don't. And then we have the famous teichacha, the rebuke. What happens if we don't follow Hashem's ways? One after the next, Moshe Rabbeinu lists out the terrible punishments and consequences that come if we don't listen. But at the end of the parsha, if we do listen, all the good things will happen. And then, very, very close in the parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Yiddish people, not only now, after 40 years since Matan Torah, Hashem gave us Leiv Lo Das, Inayim Liros, Vaznayim Lishmael. We finally are beginning to understand and appreciate how much Torah is and how special keeping the mitzvahs are. So that is the Parshas Sovo in a nutshell. It's a loaded parsha. There's so much going on in each step of the way, even the Teichacha that seems to be so harsh and hard to listen to. There are many sichas that elaborate on that. But we're going to pick one area of Parshas Sovo, and that is going to be the thank you area of Parshas Sovo. Where is that found? It's found right at the beginning, in the portion that discusses Bikurim, the gifts at the beginning of the produce, the very first to ripen fruits, and the produce that comes from a field that were brought up from wherever a Yid lived in Eretz Yisrael and carried all the way to the Beis HaMikdash and given in a gift to Hashem, which was later eaten by the Kohanim. And this joy of gratitude, this excitement is very relevant, very important and it's considered in Hasidic thought and Hasidic teachings so important that it deserves, it warrants avodah of simcha. Avodah means hard work. We're learning now that there's some type of tzedakah, which is the tzedakah of the giving of tzedakah, and then there's the avodah of tzedakah. The avodah of tzedakah is the service which is even harder. When you talk about avodah of simcha, the effort to choose to be joyful is very worthwhile, but it's an effort, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So, in this particular sikha, the Rebbe makes he puts forth the idea that when a person thinks about what Bikurim's message is, two things are going to happen. Number one, we're going to feel a tremendous sense of responsibility to not let Hashem down. And number two, we're going to feel tremendous joy in the opportunity, the ability that we have to do that. And that's what we want to focus on. What happens when a person does the Bikurim idea? And we want to look at it particularly from a Hasidic pair of glasses. So, of course, we're learning Chassidus, and we're going to learn how this week's Parshah, when you wear a pair of Hasidic glasses, you all of a sudden see the world in a different way, and we can make it so much more meaningful. So we're going to start off with asking the question. Don't answer, please, unless you feel you have to. Just think about this question. If you have ever seen somebody who is ungrateful, or at least behaving ungratefully for a good thing that they received, what does it look like in the eyes of the onlooker? We're not talking about the benefactor, the helper. If you notice somebody, if I watch somebody who has just received something good in front of my eyes, and they turn around and do or say something extremely ungrateful, what does it look like to the onlooker? And at the same time, what does it look like to the receiver of the goodness? In other words, if I get something and I'm ungrateful for it, what's going through my mind at the time? What am I thinking? Because clearly something's in my mind that's very different to what's going on to everybody else who can see from the outside. Because I'm in it, something's going on that allows me to behave ungratefully. And just think about a particular case of someone who's ungrateful, and we're asking ourselves, what's going through their mind, and what's different about that, and what's going through the mind of everyone else who can see what's happening from the outside. And if you can think of that sort of scenario, the next step is a little bit more challenging, to try and imagine, have I ever behaved not like the onlooker, but like the person who's been inside the receiving end and still remain ungrateful? And if the answer is yes, you're a winner, because you've managed to identify what's considered normal, very common amongst human beings. Of course, malachim are different. If you know one as a malach, we're not talk about that right now. But if you're human, it's very common to be grateful sometimes, but at the same time to not be grateful at other times, or for other things, or with other people, or with other circumstances, because we all have, as part of the human condition, certain things that block us from being grateful for certain areas. Now, of course, it's a maturity to be able to get past that. But for some areas in everybody's life, it's safe to assume that are areas that it requires avodah, effort. It requires effort to be able to put ourselves into that track. So if you feel like you're an angel, and this doesn't apply to you, then I'm going to suggest at least listen to the shiur so you can tell me what to do, because I do suffer from this. But if it applies to yourself, then for sure you should listen to the shiur, because this sikha, unbelievable, a mix between Tavshin, Yud, and Tavshin on Aleph, and a Chelek Lamed Sikha, to set us on fire. It's exciting to try and become more grateful. That's how the Sikha launches itself. So this is what we're going to try and learn today, and hopefully with the help of this Sikha, the Rebbe's teachings, will be able to be better positioned to be full of joy and feel responsible for all the good things that Hashem is expecting from us. Start off with a story. The Meister from the Sifsei Shalom, the Sifsei Shlomo. Sifsei Shlomo is written by a Yid who lives in London, and he writes in the different parashas. He has on Al Torah, and he writes an interesting story that happened to him. He lives in London, and at one point there was a group of Yidden who were traveling to Eretz Yisrael, and their flight got delayed, and they had to stay for Shabbos. Over Shabbos, had to stay in London. They were planning on being back home in Eretz Yisrael, and of course, when their plans got changed, they weren't so happy. But he tried his best to look after them, and he was hosting this group. And on Shabbos afternoon, a bunch of them were moaning about how terrible life is, how they'd been so looking forward to being back at home, back in Eretz Yisrael, and here they are stuck in the middle of nowhere in London. And they couldn't complain about the accommodation, they couldn't complain about the food, because they were very well looked after. But they felt, that still life could have been better. So he shared with them these two anecdotes, and he writes them on this week's Parshah Sovo. So one story he writes, one mashal that he shared with his guests at the time, was the mashal of the fellow who wrote a letter to the pirates. No, sorry, he wrote a letter to Hashem. And he told him and his wife sat down, there a letter. Hashem, we are very, very poor. We're very short of money, and we desperately need help. We need to have whatever they wrote. However many rubles, 10,000 pounds, 100,000 pounds we need. They put the letter in the post, and they sent it off with a postman addressed to Hashem. And as the story goes, the postman thinks to himself, who is Hashem? We are going to deliver it to Hashem. But the closer after that, they'll deliver it to the town's nobleman, to the pirates. And he drops off the letter by the local nobleman, the big massive palace. He says, look, this is the closest you can get a letter to Hashem. This is the superpower of the area. And the nobleman opens the letter and he sees this guy, a man is struggling, davening to Hashem. He says, you know what? I have an address. I'm going to do something kind. What does it cost me? He decides half of the whole money he's going to put into an envelope. He's going to send it back to the house, which he did. And he sends it back to the house, and as the story finishes, you probably heard the story before, that the fellow receives half of all the money he davened for in cash, in his envelope, throws it in his door. And he sits down with his wife and he says, we have to write another letter to Hashem complaining, how come you only sent half? The postman must have stolen another half. That's the joke of the story. The story was that whatever happened to this guy, he couldn't see the goodness in it. And now the joke is on us in a way, because the joke is on us that we do the same thing. We are asking for X amount, and if something good comes, but it's not what we've set ourselves up to asking for now in our mind, so then we have kindness on us. The other marshal, he writes this, and a funny story, he says there was a guy who wanted attention. So he went up to the roof. He was a very wealthy person, very lonely, and he wanted people to be his friends. So he went up to the top of a big high-rise building, and from the top of the building, he starts throwing down $100 bills or 50-pound notes, chucking them down. And everybody walking by sees a 50-pound note floating down in front of them. They see a 50-pound note, they take it, close it, put it in the pocket, and they continue working. They don't tell anybody about it, so they don't want anyone to come and tell them it's theirs. So the guy's throwing out 50s, and nobody's giving him the slightest bit of attention. But then all of a sudden, you know what, I've got a better idea. He stops throwing out 50s, and there were a bunch of pebbles on the roof. He starts chucking down pebbles. And every person that gets a pebble in the head starts screaming, shouting, coming, talking to him, whatever, at least he had the interaction. So he realizes if you give good things, you don't necessarily get a reaction. If you give not good things, it has to show them sometimes you get a different reaction. It's not a very great marshal, but it reminds us that sometimes we get a 50-pound note just flying out the wind into our pockets, and we don't stop to notice that it came from somewhere. Came from something. Somebody who cared. So in a sense, this is the idea of being able to be grateful, even if it doesn't look like we have to be. Either because we don't want to be, or because we've chosen not to, whatever the reason might be. This week's Parshah is giving us the set of glasses that encourage us to, yes, be able to say thank you, but not just say it. I don't know if you can see on the screen. They say thank you, but there's a heart on it, which is a pop-up heart. It's like there's thought being gone into the car. It's not just you wrote thank you because it's easy to say. Someone's put thought that they actually mean the thank you. And this is the idea. This is what we're going to look at. This is what we're going to work at, starting off with reading the text that's on the screen, which is a text from this week's Parshah that describes what happened when a person brought Bikurim. So it's interesting that we're going to read here from the Pasuk, that there's actually two mitzvahs when it comes to Bikurim. The mitzvah of Bikurim itself is a long mitzvah. It starts off from when the fruit first start to ripen, and it ends once the fruit are fully ripened, and you've traveled with those fruits all the way to Yerushalayim and delivered the fruits to the Kohen in the Beis HaMikdash, and then also done a hanafa. You've also got to wave them before a ritual waving before the Mizbeach. That's one mitzvah. It's a long mitzvah. It's a very exciting mitzvah. But then there's an additional mitzvah that comes alongside with that, which we'll talk about as well right now, and that is the mitzvah of a proclamation. There's a statement that has to be read out, that has to be announced in the Beis HaMikdash, together with bringing the Bikurim. The person also had to say to Hashem that I'm bringing you Bikurim. So let's read it inside in the pasuk here. It's in Kapitel Chavav, pasuk Aleph, and it will be Kisave el Haaretz, when you come to the land of Eretz, which Hashem, the Eibishter, will give you for an inheritance, and you possess it and settle in it. That you shall take of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you'll bring from the land, you will bring from your land, which Hashem, the Eibishter, is giving you. So the land is from Hashem as well. And we take the fruit that's given to us, the very first fruit that Hashem has given to us from the land that He's given to us, and we shall put them into a basket and go to the place where the Eibishter, your God, will choose to have His name dwell there, which we now know to be Yerushalayim. You bring all the fruits there. Says the pasuk, and you shall come to the priest, the Kohen, who will be serving in those days, and say to him, I declare this day to the Eibishter, your God, that I have come to the land where the Lord swore to our forefathers to give us. And the Kohen will take the basket from your hand, laying it before the Mizbeach of Hashem, the Eibishter. And you shall call out and say before Hashem, and Aramean sought to destroy my forefather, Arami Oved Avi. And he went down to Mitzrayim, and sojourned there with a small number of people, and there, Yisham, it became a great, mighty, and numerous nation. We remember these verses, these psukim, from the Haggadah on Seder night. But in Seder night, we read this part, which talks about how we started off, even before slavery, we started off as schleppers by Uncle Lavan. And from there, we went to become slaves in Mitzrayim. And the Egyptians treated us cruelly and afflicted us and imposed hard labor upon us. So we cried out to the Eibishter, our God, our forefathers, and the Eibishter heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. And Hashem brought us out from Egypt with a strong hand, with an outstretched arm, with great awe, and with signs and wonders. And He brought us to this place, and He gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first of the fruit of the ground which you, O Lord, have given to me. Then you shall lay it before the Eibishter, your God, and prostrate yourself before Hashem, the Eibishter. Then says the pasuk, once you've brought all your things, and you've made this declaration, v'samachta b'chal hatoiv, then you shall rejoice with all the good that Hashem, your Eibishter, has granted you, and your household, you, the Levite, the Levi, the Ger, and the stranger who is among you, and everybody will rejoice with this Bikurim. So that's this week's Parshah telling us the mitzvah of Bikurim. What's fascinating is that the pasuk that tells us about the declaration, which is right in part of the pasuk that tells us to bring the actual Bikurim, here we have, the pasuk reads, V'anisa v'amarta. You shall say this statement. But in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, is an extra word. It doesn't just say v'amarta and you shall say. It says v'anisa v'amarta. So they translated it here, and you shall call out and say before Hashem. So it's not good enough just to say. We have to do call out and say. So we're going to change the slide and look at Rashi. Rashi tells us v'anisa lashon haramas koil. What does it mean to call out? You shall respond. An expression of using a raised voice. Something about the Bikurim has to make me want to call out. Call out, says Rashi, lift my voice. And we're going to talk about three questions that the Rebbe discusses between the two sichos. Number one, what's the point of raising our voice? What does the Torah hope to achieve or encourage us to do? By telling us to raise our voice. Question number one. Question number two, what's the rejoicing? Why does Hashem want us all of a sudden now to start rejoicing? Of course, we should be joyful all the time, but why now more than ever? Number three is going to be, what's the lesson for us in today's day and age? Of course, we have lots of Torah lessons, and we can go to a shir, and we can listen to good things. How's it going to change my life? What's going to be different if I learn Parshas Sovo, or in the words of the Rebbe, if I live with Parshas Sovo? How's my life going to be different than if I didn't? Where's the edge in this part of the Torah, Torah's Chaim, a Torah full of lessons of life for life? So this is what our challenges are, 3 questions. And from here, we're going to go into understanding the answer. But as we said, particularly with a Hasidic understanding of Bikurim, a Hasidic understanding of what the Vanisa, raising your voices, a Hasidic understanding of what Samachta is, what it means to be joyful, and then, of course, a Hasidic answer to understanding what the lesson is. So in order to do that, we're going to go a step back. We're going to understand a little bit about Bikurim's halachas, how the Chinuch explains it. From there, we're going to go and understand why Bikurim is necessary for an average farmer, or the lesson that could work, or how it applies to the average person. And then we're going to start talking how Chassidus uses Bikurim to teach us about life. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start from Bikurim. There's a mitzvah in the Torah we just read about in this week's Parshah. So we check the book that describes mitzvahs. The Sefer describes mitzvahs, the Sefer HaChinuch tells us the logic and the details, basically, as in the basic logic and the basic details of each mitzvah one by one. So in the mitzvah of Bikurim, bringing the gift, and in the mitzvah of the proclamation, the statement that has to be read. We have it here on the screen, text 3a and text 3b, which we are going to read inside. We're going to try and do minimal amount of readings and maybe focus more on the discussion. So here's text 3a that the Chinuch writes about why we bring Bikurim, the logic of the mitzvah, the reasoning. What's the sense of the mitzvah? Says the Sefer HaChinuch, mitzvah 91, the reason for this mitzvah is to place Hashem's word as our primary source of joy, reminding us that everything comes from Hashem. So by bringing Bikurim, we're reminding ourselves that everything comes from Hashem. Thus, we were commanded to bring the first fruit that ripens on the trees to the Kohanim who serve in his house, by dint of our expression of thanks and acceptance of Hashem's rule. The ruler of the world is Hashem. And by accepting that, that would make sense to bring now Bikurim. We will be worthy of his blessing on our fruits. If I can accept that and therefore bring Bikurim, that appreciation itself becomes the reason why I'm worthy. I am now worthy of the blessings that Hashem has sent in our fruits. Because I'm able to appreciate, that's why I am worthy of brachas. Unbelievable idea. So the concept of Bikurim, says the Chinuch, in a Pashta Pshat, in a Nigla de Torah approach, is the basic understanding of Bikurim is that the farmer has to be grateful. And the Chinuch throws in, when the farmer is grateful, then the farmer is worthy of the blessings that come through the farm and through the fruits that came from it. That's text 3a. Text 3b now is mitzvah 606, way later, which is the declaration, the reading that has to be read when one brings Bikurim. And the reason for this mitzvah, says the Sefer HaChinuch, truth is impressed upon a person by power of the words they use. The words I use will impress upon me the truths of the word. So knowing something is one thing, and then spending time talking about it drives that truth, impresses that truth upon me. And so much as Hashem was good to me, good to him, and blessed his land with fruits, and he merited to bring them to the holy Beis Hamikdash, this person ought to rouse his heart with speech I should talk about it. To ponder the fact that everything comes to him from the Master of the universe. Ponder it. He should speak of Hashem's kindness to all the people of Israel. Thus he begins his recital with the subject of Yaakov, our father, whom Hashem rescued from the hand of Laban, and the subject of our bondage in Egypt, and how Hashem rescued us from their hands. Following the praise, he requests from Hashem to constantly bless him, because this idea of where I'm connecting my goodness, how I understand and experience the good things Hashem is giving to me, with a giver, with Hashem, because Hashem is giving that to me. And it's not just in my personal life from there now, but in the general idea of recognizing that Hashem is saving us all the time. As far back as Lavan Arami and Mitzrayim. From arousal of his soul with the praise of Hashem and his goodness, says the Chinuch again, he will merit that his land be blessed. And that's why Hashem commanded us about this, for he desires kindness. It's out of Hashem's goodness. He made it part of a ritual to do things that will make us become worthy. Amazing how the Chinuch spins it. Hashem gave us a mitzvah built into the system, things that will make us behave in a way that Hashem will want to reward us. Almost like a parent telling the child, say these words every time I'm upset. Or every time you want to impress me, these are the words you should say to me, and then I'll be say, well done, and I want to give you good things. Hashem's done that for us. He's told us what to say so that we become more grateful, and now we become worthy. That is the mitzvah of Bikurim. And the statement, the proclamation that follows it, these two mitzvahs are done, says the Chinuch, in order to change how we are so that we become worthy. And that's before we started Chassidus. Before we started explaining it, the idea that we have mitzvahs that are set up by Hashem to help us become better positioned to be receiving a good gebench diyar, all the good things that we need. How amazing. This is the greatness of Bikurim and the lesson that it brings. Bikurim reminds us to always remember Hashem's goodness and bounty, to say thank you, to reach out and say, wow, how wonderful is this world? I'm so grateful for it. That's what we're up to until now. There's an unbelievable story in Igris, in the earlier volumes, in which you can only guess what the letter was, because we only see in the Igris, the Rebbe's letters, you see what the Rebbe responded to someone. But it's a very, very sharp letter. It was probably written to somebody who the Rebbe had a close relationship with, because the Rebbe is very sharp. The fellow was writing that he had a lot of tsaras in Parnasa, and they'd had ongoing tsaras. In other words, things hadn't got better, it only got worse, and it was continuing and continuing and continuing. And the person basically, seems from the letter, had written that life has always been hard. Life has always been bad for him. But the letter writes that it's for him, his wife, and his children are having a really hard time, and life's terrible, and he doesn't think things will ever change because it's always been bad, and he's never had any good times. And the Rebbe basically calls him out and says, your letter is so self-contradictory. You write about your wife and your children. If you just stop and think about how many thousands and thousands of people are davening to have a bracha of a child, to be gebenched with Bana Zarachaya v'Kayama. And here you have children. You write about a good wife and children that what it seems from your letter, you didn't pray too hard to get. And yet you turn around and say that Hashem has never given you any goodness. And the letter continues to say, perhaps, and the Rebbe says, I'm not here to suggest that Chassan Nisa should be the case. Adarab, I bench you with all the good things. But perhaps Hashem is waiting to see how you behave with the goodness He's already allocated before He trusts you with more goodness. So why don't you stop complaining, start appreciating and being grateful for what you have, and then Hashem will certainly trust you with more goodness. Very powerful, very strong, sharp letter. But it highlights this idea of where when we get good things, by showing appreciation, we become worthy of getting more goodness. I think as parents or as educators, we can sometimes relate to this idea. We're waiting for the child to say thank you, and then we want to do more goodness, kindness, excitement, happy things. But the child has to start appreciating, or the recipient has to start acknowledging this sort of goodness. And that sort of gratitude is what shifts us and changes us so that we become a more worthy being. That's a little of the background of Bikurim from a Nigla point of view, from a before you get to Hasidus point of view. In order to understand the Hasidic approach to Bikurim, we go on to the next step. We know what Bikurim is in general. It's being grateful, talking about it, which is the second mitzvah, so that we actually mean it, and that makes us into worthy receptacles, vessels, to be able to beget more goodness. Makes us better people. Here we have a Hasidic foundational idea, and Hasidus teaches us this idea from the very beginning. It's in Sharach V'Amunah, right at the beginning, where in order to understand anything to do with me and my Creator, the relationship between Olam, Nivra, and Boira, Creator and creation, the starting point in the Hasidic idea is to know that it's Yesh Mi'ayin. What's Yesh Mi'ayin? That the world's existence is something out of nothing. Creation is something out of nothing. What's the difference if it's something out of something or something out of nothing? So one of the simple ways of explaining the difference is something needs a very good reason to stop being something. If something is here, if there's a computer screen in front of you, or there's a piece of plastic in your hand called a receiver or a phone, in order for that to stop being plastic, there has to be a very good reason to make it stop being plastic, because it's a something. In order for it to stop being a something, there needs a very good reason for it to stop being a something. Nothing doesn't need a reason to stop being. It needs a very good reason to start being. Nothing remains nothing, and there's no reason for it to stop being nothing unless something makes it into something. So if we say that the whole universe is nothing, and then it became something, what we're saying is really that Hashem created the world for no reason. Only because Hashem wanted it to. There was no other reason for the world to exist, because really the world would have been nothing. Ayin. And the only reason why it's here is because it's being created. And if that's the case, the Alter Rebbe says in Sha'ar Yichud Emunah in text 5, it doesn't happen one time. It doesn't get switched on and then remain on. For nothing to be a something requires constant creation. Constant creation is the foundation of all understandings when it comes to creator and creation relationship. If we want to understand what I can do for Hashem, how I should relate to Hashem, where Hashem proves his existence, or justify the fact that I believe in Hashem, or anything to that effect, the starting point of any conversation or thought process has to be Yesh Mi'ayin, means constant creation. Because if I'm missing that foundational block, then I don't begin to get a clear picture, because everything that I'm building is castles in the sand. It didn't start because there's no foundation. So what I have to know is that when I look around, I see very strong scientific rules. I see very strong, powerful entities, people, forces, all these powerful things that meet the eye. All of that is only part of creation. And creation is exactly that. It's created. Created means that there was no reason for it to be, and Hashem made it become and be, and it's constantly happening. It's constant creation. This sort of approach has to be reminded and reminded over and over again, because there's no rule in science that reminds us this without letting us forget. We have to remind ourselves all the time, because if not, we'll forget it. And this is the foundational block when it comes to any type of connection to Hashem. So let's read this inside from text 5 in Sha'ar Yichud V'Emunah, this foundational idea that the world is in existence this moment because right now Hashem is choosing to make it. It has none existence of its own. Its sum total of its existence is only the fact that Hashem decided right now to create it again and again. Let's read inside. It's written in Iksiv, La'olam Hashem Dvorcha Nitzav Bashamayim. It's Tehillim, forever, O Hashem, your words stand firm in the heavens. And the Baal Shem Tov, Zichron Lavracha, explained, your word, which words are we referring to? Your word which you uttered, Yehi Rakia, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. When Hashem said in the original Mamoris, the original statements, let there be light, let there be a firmament in the heavens, and each time the Eibush uses words, so to speak, to create, those words that Hashem used to create heaven, these very words and letters stand firmly forever in the firmament of the heaven, and are forever, la'olam, integrated within all the heavens, to give them life. As it is written, the words of our Hashem shall stand firm forever. And his words live and stand firm forever. Says the Alter Rebbe, to explain what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching us. For if the letters were to depart, his letters of Hashem's statement, creational statement, if they were to depart even for an instant, chas v'shalom, and they would return to the source, then all the heavens would become naught and absolutely nothingness. And it would be as though they had never existed at all. Because creation is exactly that. It's created. And created means that it wasn't there before. There was no reason for it to come before, but it was created. It was made to be. When something's made to be, it needs to be made all the time. It needs to be made all the time. When we get that in our head, we start thinking of the fact that all of Shemayim Va'aretz is around because Hashem wants it to be around. Knowledge that our existence every second depends on Hashem becomes the perfect tool to stir up feelings of gratitude, gratefulness. But I only think about the fact that I exist, my field exists, the stuff that I own exists, is only because Hashem's code is constantly creating. And it's making it happen right now. How grateful am I to Hashem for the fact that Hashem created leather to make shoes and allowing part of that leather to become owned by me so that I can have the kind of shoes that I like, or anything else that I own and I'm comfortable with. That's a creation that's being created by Hashem right now, as well as everything else that I enjoy and I'm benefiting from. When I can stop and think of creation in those terms, now I already have a whole different appreciation. So now, moving right along, we're going to move on to a beautiful Orach Chaim that takes this idea one step further. And here, the Orach Chaim tells us that the idea of the announcement out loud, va'anisa, making the statement of gratefulness, of gratitude, but speaking it out loud, has the same shirish. The word has the same etymology. The root of the word is anav and ani. Anav means humility. Ani means poverty. A poor man or a low man, a humble man, is the man who is able to be grateful. Because gratitude is connected with recognizing that the world is from Hashem constantly. And a person who recognizes that is humble and recognizes that the money that I have isn't mine. The money that I have is from Hashem. Let's read the Orach Chaim HaKadosh here in text 8. It's possible that the word is related to ani, poverty, or oni, humility. When an undeserving individual has received a great favor from his king, he humbles himself before the king with a contrite heart. Similarly, one bringing Bikurim ought to humble himself before Hashem. He does so by recounting the lowly beginnings of the Jewish people whose ancestor Yaakov was a hired hand working for Lavan, who made every effort to destroy him, and we tell Hashem's miracles until ultimately we were redeemed from Egypt and brought to the promised land. Now here's where I want to just shift. When you read the Orach Chaim, it could almost sound depressing. I bring Bikurim and I remind myself how dependent I am, how small I am. And when I'm very small, then I have to say thank you. Almost like it's a weakness to be grateful. Now, to be honest, for most people, I should be careful here. Let's just say for most men. That might be a safe thing to say tonight. But let's just say for a lot of people, it's very, very humbling to say thank you, to be grateful. Why is it humbling? Because it implies that I am dependent. I have to be thankful to you, to thank you. Chassidus tells us that absolutely not. Humility isn't lowliness. Humility isn't a bad thing. Being humble is a good thing. It's so great. It's such a good feeling to be feeling humble. It feels so uplifting to feel lowly. Why does it feel uplifting to be humble? What is humility that feels so uplifting? And why would you be excited to say thank you? To show dependence? Why would that be a good thing? And how can that make me feel better or more uplifted? That's the angle that Chassidus is come and teach with. It's just so beautiful. It's so gorgeous to be able to see how Chassidus teaches us real life, not life that deals with the issues that we come up with, but life the way it is designed to be. Humility is so uplifting. It's so encouraging. To be able to be grateful is such a fantastic thing. So the way the Rebbe does it is, this is a beautiful angle that the Rebbe takes. And the Rebbe asks a question. We might do a little less text because I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. And we're not doing great. Oh, the choice of your words in Mikurim allude to how we humbly acknowledge and depend on Hashem. Okay, that was this past slide. The humility of Mitzrayim. But here we're talking about humility. Chassidus asks this question. Making a bracha before we have a drink. Not so dissimilar to making a statement when we bring the Bikurim. We make a bracha before we have a drink. Why do we make a bracha before we have a drink? So we all know that we have to say a bracha before we eat, before we drink, before we do a mitzvah. Why do we make a bracha? It says in the Gemara in Brachas, it tells us that when a person wants to enjoy any item that exists in this world, it really belongs to Hashem. So how dare I take something that is Hashem's and use it for myself? And the answer is, when I make a bracha, it's like asking permission from Hashem. And when I say the bracha, I say to Hashem, please can I have? And it's almost like a automatic, yes, you can, every time you say the bracha. Auto response. That's how the Gemara seems to be talking. Comes along Chassidus and says, oh, no, a second. Before I made the bracha, it belonged to Hashem. It was totally connected to Hashem. I make a bracha, and now I can have it. So when it belongs to Hashem, it's godly, and therefore I can't take it. When I make a bracha, it becomes less godly, and that's why I can take it. How does that make sense? How does it make sense that making a bracha over an item makes it less getlich, less godliness? Making a bracha should make things more holy, not less holy. So if I can't eat it because it's too much Hashem's, so how can making a bracha make it less? It seems backwards. So on a technical, halachic point of view, no problem. Yeah, he said please and Hashem said thank you. If you start thinking about it, it's actually a great question. Why does making a bracha make it less godly? Why does it make it less kedusha? And of course, you can imagine, you could probably guess that the answer is going to be that the bracha doesn't make the item less kedusha. If anything, the other way around. When I make a bracha, I become more godly. And therefore, what I was out of reach for me before, because I wasn't on the level of kedusha that could connect to Hashem's greatness that is clear in this item, once I make a bracha, I now can. But it's a little bit more cute, it's more interesting than that, and that is, the Rebbe points us to have a look at certain food items are forbidden for most Yidden to eat. Example would be Bikurim or Teruma. Teruma is a good example. You give something to the Kohen is allowed to eat it, but you can't give it away as a gift. It's holy food. Nobody else is allowed to eat it. Except for who? The Kohen, his immediate family, as in his wife and children. And if the Kohen happens to own a servant, a slave, so now that slave is owned by a Kohen, is allowed to eat from that food. Why? Because if the ownership is the Kohen's ownership, so now everything about all the items owned by a Kohen, and including people, become part of the Kohen. They're the Kohen's possession. And therefore, whatever the Kohen has permission to eat, this servant also has permission to eat. When I make a bracha, I'm giving myself over to be a servant of Hashem. When I'm a servant of Hashem, then I can partake in Hashem's food like a servant partakes in the food of his owner, the Kohen. That's what making a bracha is. It's such a connection to Hashem that I am now in a position that I can benefit from it. How does a bracha do that? The answer is the basic foundation that we spoke about. I am saying a bracha to Hashem. How do I understand the relationship between me and my Creator? Everything is constantly being created by Hashem. So when I am aware of that, then I am acknowledging, accepting, committing myself to be on a mission from Hashem. But before I acknowledge that, I see myself as me, and then there's Hashem. So if I feel separate from Hashem, then who am I to take Hashem's food? But when I make a bracha, and I say, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu, Melech Ha'olam, that Hashem is the creator, and therefore the king of the entire universe, including me, so I am but a servant of Hashem. Now I'm eating out of Hashem's food because I am but a servant. I am the possession of the Rabbeinu Shalom. This is what it means to make a bracha. To make a bracha means to remind myself that I am a servant of Hashem. We were going to read this inside, a beautiful part of the Sikh and Tashin and Aleph, the idea, the concept of Kabbalah. So, and the next step is, says the Rebbe, that helps us understand what gratitude is. To be grateful, as we said before, means to recognize my dependency. Doesn't mean to say that I recognize that I'm a loser and a schmerel and I can't do anything on my own and therefore I have to rely on somebody else. That's not what it means to be grateful to Hashem. To be humble means to recognize that La Hashem ha'aretz u'malaya, the entire universe is but a creation of Hashem. That's humility. Not that I recognize that I don't have enough talent or skill. I'm smaller than somebody else. To have humility, to have appreciation, to be thankful to Hashem, it's not to say that I'm small. To be thankful to Hashem means that I humbly accept that I am Hashem's creation. And creation means that Hashem makes me out of nothing. That's who I am. So not that I'm small and lowly, but that I'm humble. I acknowledge what's really true. That's uplifting. That I recognize that essentially, not only am I bringing Bikurim, but I am Bikurim. What's Bikurim? Bikurim is bringing a gift to Hashem out of recognition that everything comes from Hashem. The bringer of the Bikurim is Bikurim. This is the statement that happens after the gift. So I bring fruits that I feel like I'm the farmer, I've been working for a year, and I bring that gift to Hashem. But then I make a statement. And I say, actually, Hashem, you run the world. You not only run the world, you create the world, including me and everything that I have. That's humility. That's not degrading. It's humility that's so uplifting. I recognize that the Ribbono Shel Olam, the master of the universe, created me and creates me because Hashem wants me. And then two things happen. Text 16a from the Rebbe. We're going to read this inside. The knowledge that Hashem created the world specifically for us. And the idea that we must live our lives as Hashem's Bikurim is not something limited to our spiritual lives. We are not only Hashem's chosen people and compared to his gifts when we daven or learn Torah. In fact, this is a mindset that should constantly remain in one's conscience throughout their day. Even when involved in matters far removed from spirituality, amongst the mundane business or day-to-day issues, a Jew must always keep in mind that they are Bikurim to Hashem. What we're learning here is, number one, once I realized that Bikurim isn't just give a gift to Hashem in appreciation. Bikurim is recognize that I am Hashem's. Of course my fruits are. But the whole Bikurim experience is being able to come to terms and impress upon my heart that me and everything about me is Bikurim of Hashem. So now I realize that there's not just one area in my life that I need to be focused when I do it. Of course, I shouldn't talk in shul. Of course, I try and go to learn Torah when I can. But everything that I'm spending time on, whether it's WhatsApp, or it's cleaning dishes, or it's shopping, or it's chatting with friends, whatever it is, whatever I'm spending time on, fill in the blank. If it's worth doing, it's because Hashem wants me to do it. Because Hashem is so invested, so caring about me. Hashem calls me his Bikurim. Hashem wants me. He created me. That's what he created the whole universe for. When I recognize that I am Hashem's Bikurim, and that's the way we translate it, I am the possession of Hashem. Like by the bracha. The reason why I can eat this is because I belong to Hashem. That's what I'm making in the bracha, and that's why I'm going to eat this food. So when I have that recognition, number one is I feel responsible for every part of my life. Because everything that I'm doing, I'm using Hashem's resources, time, gifts, talents, and that's what I'm doing all day. So I'm having a schmooze. I'm sitting on the couch. I'm catching my breath. This is all Hashem's resources. How fantastic and responsible I must feel every moment of that. I'm going to do it properly. I'm not going to rest and let myself be disturbed in the middle of my rest. I'm not going to daven and let some ping on the phone let me disturb the davening, because right now I'm fully invested. I'm Bikurim. Hashem owns me. Hashem makes me because he needs me and everything that I do about it. That's number one, the responsible or the responsibility factor that's so greatly amplified when I recognize how uplifting humility is. Humility meaning recognizing that I'm a creation of Hashem. And then, of course, the Rebbe wouldn't let us go without this, the simcha. The simcha, the joy that a person feels when I know that even when things are going so pear-shaped, just so not working out, so what? I am still Bikurim. Everything that's happening to me right now is because Hashem is creating it so. Of course, I should do the best that I can, but I've got to remind myself, this is who I am. Let's read inside. The feeling of great responsibility and care a Jew must take with his Bikurim behavior brings along a tremendous sense of joy from the incredible privilege that divine providence deemed him worthy to be Hashem's Bikurim, affording them with the opportunity to offer themselves along with all of the thoughts, speech, and action. How many times do we just spend time thinking about whatever it is? Something we just noticed, something we're worried about, whatever it is, that thought, Hashem is with us. Hashem owns us. Hashem is giving it to us. We are Bikurim of Hashem. This is the opportunity, the privilege we have by Hashgacha Pratis. Indeed, the actual mitzvah of Bikurim in temple times was carried out with the tremendous joy, fanfare, and music, and etc. Concluding with loud, joyous proclamation detailed in Torah. This is what we should be doing. By the time it comes to the end of the day, and oftentimes we're falling off our feet because we've had a hard day, you should be falling off your feet with so much joy. Because you are Bikurim. This is Parshah Sovo. Be'ezus Hashem, when we say Moed Ani tomorrow morning, when we say Shema before we go to bed tonight, we're on fire. We are the Bikurim of Hashem. We're making Mashiach. We're making this world a home for Hashem. And everything about our life is Bikurim. of course, with a tremendous responsibility, but equally with enormous sense of privilege, upliftedness, knowing that we are the Bikurim of Hashem. Hashem should bench every one of us, and Be'eber Hashem, we should certainly be able to do, of course, mitzvahs, but also look after our health, our emotional health, our families, and all the good things. Until Mashiach comes. Just want to remind everyone, if you want to book a Zoom or a WhatsApp mezuzah check for the position of your mezuzahs, you're welcome to do so. And the other announcement I wanted to share with Rosh Hashanah around the corner, if you know anybody who won't be able to make it to shul for shofar, and especially if they're shielding, I don't want to come out, shofar.support, www.shofar, shofar, shofar.support. You can put in requests for a shofar blowing, for a shofar training course, to volunteer, spread the word, and Hashem should bench everybody with all the goodness. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try and answer. And I wish you all a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you very soon, Bez Hashem and Mashiach now.
Thank you, lady. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you very much. Amen to all the prophets. Thank you very much.
And to you.
Thank you. Talta. No questions? Going once, going twice, and 3 times.